Today, I picked up my farm jacket from the cleaners. It looks new. Under the plastic it's wrapped in, it smells chemically clean. All the farm has been washed away. The jacket only makes this trip to the cleaners once a year, once summer is solidly here, and I know there is no chance in Arkansas I'll be needing a quilt-lined canvas jacket again for quite a while. In fact, I haven't actually worn it since March. I confess that I smelled it before I left it at the cleaners, pressed my face deep into its folds, and drank in its scent, remembering. Late in March, here at the farm, we kick off our peak tourism season, complete with hay rides, live music, farm fresh foods, and petting zoo. This time of year, the farm is as presentable as you can make a working farm. The fields are mowed, the shelters are mucked, fresh pine shavings are spread, and goat babies have arrived. Our entire farm calendar is based on the perfectly timed arrival of the goat babies, beginning March 1st. That 3 or 4 week window of time between March 1st and the kickoff of touring season is what we call kidding season. Early in March, when the babies come fast and furry, this farm is no place for visitors. Still braless in the barn at noon, I may be found working with a new mom and her baby born overnight, trying to get them to recognize they belong together. If a cold snap hits, there will be babies in tubs and heaters running in the barn. My hammock will be strung up from one barn pole to another, a place for me to try to sleep between stage 1's early labor and stage 2's active labor, or to snuggle a newborn, tucking it into this jacket to keep it warm. There may be a cat in the corner, chewing on a piece of umbilical cord cut during the night, and a half bottle of colostrum setting by the barn sink. In the most dire of circumstances, there may be a baby goat spending its evenings and nights in a diaper in the house so that I can avoid every 2-hour trips to the barn for nighttime feedings. Once, we even managed to save a newborn found frost-covered and sucking in a sad little breath only every 7 seconds or so. Moxie, named for her won't-stop attitude, lived in the house and was fed by stomach tube for days before she finally learned how to suckle. Her legs were horribly misshapen, but some physical therapy and toilet paper tube leg braces worked so well that now as a 2-year-old goat, one would never know she'd had such a rough start. You've probably seen those memes like, "I'm sorry for what I said when I was hungry," or "I'm sorry for what I said when you woke me up early." I'd have to say, I'm sorry for what I said when it was kidding season. I walk around in a sleep-deprived haze for most of that 3 or 4 weeks. That said, being present to assist as my goats give birth and then witnessing those newborns find those wobbly legs, well, I look forward to it all year. A few kidding seasons back, my sassy goat Honey gave birth to triplets. My son Elijah, 7 years old at the time, scooped up the tiniest one, still wet from birth, pulled her up to his face, and declared that she smelled like a Pop-Tart, and thus she was named. And he wasn't wrong. There is a sweetness to the smell of a newborn goat. During kidding season, I cannot escape that smell. My work gloves and this jacket are bathed in it. It's so strong, I once picked up my kids from the bus stop with my jacket in the back of the van, and the kids immediately knew it had to be in the car somewhere. But when the season ends and the jacket has had its yearly cleaning and the babies are dry and frolicking in the field, the smell is gone, and I forget its sweetness. This year marked my 8th kidding season. Each year I forget the nuances of that smell, and I'm eager to drink it in when it's renewed on the farm each spring. It is, of course, the smell of the amniotic fluid, still fresh on baby's slick hair. But to me, it is the smell of life, new life. It's strongest right at first, before mother has licked her baby dry in the way she innately knows to do. But if you bury your nose into the neck fur as you cuddle new arrivals, you can still make it out for days afterward. One day, early in March this year, I had 2 mamas-to-be corralled in the birthing pen for close watching. Both Honey and Shake were seasoned mamas. While I was in the barn to check on them, Shake had her first contraction, then another. Within minutes, she was actively pushing and utilizing 3 healthy pushes, birthed an 8-pound baby boy. His face was covered with a part of the amniotic sac, so I suctioned his airways clear as Shake set to work licking him clean. She worked diligently for about 5 minutes until, with 3 more even pushes, a daughter was born. By the time she was licked clean, her brother was already standing and looking for milk. I stripped Shake's teat, clearing the orifice's waxy plug, and positioned him where his little bobbing head would be more likely to find the right spot. It's natural to want to grab their little heads and push them toward the teat, but experience has taught me that their reflex when nudged from behind the head is to push back against it. Goats, stubborn right from the beginning. Instead, it's just better to stand them in the right spot and angle Mama's teat toward their mouths. In this case, he figured it out right away, and Sister wasn't far behind. It was a picture-perfect delivery of 2 healthy little ones. Well done, Shake. I turned to check back in on Honey, the other goat corralled in the birthing suite. By this time, she had been down for a week. She was enormous, just lying there. I'd been trying to reposition her every few hours. Discussions with our vet had led us to rule out several possible conditions and determine that she likely had a pinched nerve. She'd grown so large that a nerve in her pelvis had been pinched, rendering her hind legs powerless. Alert and eating and drinking for the entire week, she just could not stand. My fear as her due date approached was that she wouldn't be able to push when contractions came on. I had researched goat cesarean sections via YouTube, but knew that the risk of infection was too high for a home surgery. A vet an hour and a half from us performs them in office, but transporting Honey in this condition would be dangerous. Just as Shake's babies tottered around the pen, Honey ground her teeth and let her head roll back. It was beginning. My vet had believed Honey would be able to deliver normally, despite that pinched nerve. We would soon know. Honey and I had a complicated history. She was one of our original 5 goats. We built the pen and did our research and made our plans and had 5 goats delivered right to our backyard homestead at our house in town. Honey was a yearling that spring and was bred later that fall. She bore twin bucklings, the first babies born to Brood Farm, before we were even Brood Farm, before we lived on the 80 acres that now houses it all. Honey loved me from the start. She would run to the fence to greet me and give me kisses on the cheek as I stroked her neck. She loved for me to stroke her neck. She could be pretty ornery and would bite me on the elbow if I was within reach, but not stroking her on the neck. As a milker, Honey turned out to be less than ideal. She would tap dance on the milk stand, and getting any milk from her pencil-shaped teats was quite literally a pain. If she finished her food while still on the stand, she would let me know by picking up her feed bowl and with her mouth, and with a fling, picking the feed bowl up with her mouth, and with a fling of her head, throwing it across the barn. When a young farmer who was just getting into goats was looking for a good first milker, I actually sold her. I'd never sold a goat in milk, but he was not planning to hand milk, and her genetics were desirable, and I wanted to help him get started, so I sold her. It seemed like a good fit. Then when I saw her listed for sale on Facebook a week or so later, I bought her back. She forgave me immediately, and we went back to our old patterns of biting her and neck stroking me. Here in the birthing pen, Honey was nearly 10 years old, and the only remaining goat from those original 5. In all those kidding seasons, we had never lost a mother during labor or delivery. I knew we were blessed in that. And as she threw her head back in pain again, I was fearful about how this would progress. Honey's labor did progress, but she never pushed. Nothing I could do would stimulate her to push. When I gloved up, I could feel the little hooves inside her. I closed my eyes and felt from hoof on up the leg, analyzing the way each joint bent to identify whether it was the knee of a front leg or the hawk of a hind. Then I positioned one of the babies correctly, setting Honey up to push productively. She never did, and there was so much amniotic fluid and blood. In fact, blood in the amniotic fluid. Maybe this was never going to turn out well. Though I got the first baby into position and could get a hold of his front hooves, even giving it all I had, I could not entice that baby to slide out. I spent the next hours weighing my narrowing options and working diligently as Honey writhed in pain. At dark, when John made it home from the soccer game he'd coached that evening, he found me there behind the barn, on my knees in the saturated pine shavings, with my goat, who had all but given up. I sat back and let him glove up and work for a few minutes and then reached the conclusion I'd already reached. Her energy was spent. She'd lost too much blood. He went for the gun as I stroked Honey's neck and told her stories about our times together. Even then, when I'd utterly failed her, she loved me. She lay her tired head in my lap and looked up at me gently. Goodbye. After she'd been put down, I set to work slicing into her uterus just like I'd seen on the YouTube video. Careful not to cut too deep, I found my way to wet, slick fur. I knew that any baby inside was likely not viable, but I'd worked with those little ankles all evening and I had to see those little ones. They were twin boys. A set of bucklings. I pulled each one out and lay him in the grass beside his mother. One of them had bald ankles, hairless in the spots I had worked with for hours in my efforts to free him. They lie there, lined up, long and lean and wet, like fish after a fishing trip. Mama goat and two lifeless fish bodies, and me. And it was quiet and still. For the first time in hours. Sitting in the grass, I pulled my knees into my chest and wrapped my arms around them, tucking in my head. I was so wet, soaked through with amniotic fluid and tears and sweat. I smelled that sweet smell, that Pop-Tart smell. That smell had always been a smell of life, new life. I had loved that smell. Now I was angry. This had ruined it for me. This smell was supposed to be the smell of life, but here I was on the ground next to 3 dead goats, and that smell was nearly suffocating. John joined me on the ground. It was like he could read my mind. "There is life in this," he said. "This?" I motioned toward the lifeless bodies next to me. "Yes." Of course, he was right. Death is a part of life. We bury goats even as we bring others into the world. Life and death go hand in hand. It's part of the circle. I went on to fashion our entire spring field trip curriculum based on the circles found in nature. The Earth's travel around the sun, the cycle of water, the seasons changing, the way our animals and produce feed one another on this farm. Over the course of the spring, I taught nearly 1,000 kids about these circles we see all around us. As we talked about each one, I made one with my arms, hands meeting overhead, and they would mimic me. Little circles everywhere. And the circle I always had in the back of my mind was this circle of life. Before leaving the barn, after saying goodbye to Honey and her little ones, I picked up Shake's little girl, born just hours before. I buried my face into her fur and drank it in. There it was, that same sweet smell. It is the smell of life. I've recently turned 40. John has too. For our big birthdays, we got tattoos. Not matching, but each one that has a special meaning to us individually. John says that when you get a new tattoo, folks ask about its meaning, you need to have 3 explanations ready. A one-liner for folks who ask in passing, a paragraph for those who want a little more, and the full explanation for those who really want to know and who you want to let in and who have the time to listen and maybe share some coffee on the porch swing during its telling. I guess this is that, my long-form explanation, told as I sit here on the porch swing with you. I wish that you could tattoo a smell. I could just tattoo that sweet smell of life onto my wrist. Then I wouldn't forget the smell or what it means to me during the months when my jacket is clean and covered in plastic and waiting in my closet for the first cold snap. Since tattooing a scent is not an option, I settled on a stack of overlapping circles. It's on my wrist, right where I can see veins just behind it carrying my blood in a loop through my body, a circle of sorts. This tattoo reminds me of the circles in nature and in life. Nature loves circles. God must love circles. He authored all of them and plans to make all of this new again one day, just like it was in the beginning. We're circling back. On days that are rough, we remind each other that the sun will rise in the morning. Of course, the sun is stationary, still. It's we who are turning a circle back around to it. With this circle stack on my wrist, right where I might spritz a sweet-smelling perfume, I can look at it and remember. Even when it's hard to see, even when it's hard to smell, life is a circle.